Chapter 11 The King's Day. As the three travelers continued toward the city, they became part of the moving crowd. It was hard to believe that so many people lived in this part of the country, and soon from their talk it appeared that many came from farther north. News of the king's conversion had spread from mouth to mouth as trading up and down the countryside and around the coast took its usual course. It would take many weeks and months, no doubt, for the news to reach the most distant corners of the kingdom, but it had spread already beyond the ancient Roman city of London, probably as the result of a chance remark of the king's overheard by a servant and passed by him to his friends. Indeed, it might also almost be supposed that the news of the king's decision had been spreading even before he himself had finally made up his mind. Because of Queen Bertha's faith, the fact that the king might come to worship her god had long been spoken of. The ground was therefore rich and fertile when the seed of gossip at last dropped into it. The day was fine. It was the 2nd of June. The trees were in splendid leaf, their green fresh and tender. By the wayside, the hawthorn flowers still lingered, and dog roses were bursting into bloom. There was meadow sweet and buttercup and campion, and under the trees and stretches of woodland the last bluebells and a few late primroses. Wulfstan looked around him at the crowd in an awed fashion. I cannot count the numbers. We might be in Rome when the people go to the Colosseum on a holiday. Mostly, indeed, the people seemed in a joyful holiday mood, but here and there could be seen solemn groups who kept always together. This, it was certain, had come to bewail the king's desertion of the old gods. Have they come from my old home? Fritha wondered. What if my uncle Hardra should come, and Uthra too? We shall protect you, Wolf said. But he looked at his father and frowned a little. Fritha's situation was a difficult one. She had no home to go to now that her father was dead. It was unthinkable that she should return to the village where Hardra and Uthra waited. It was hard to see what was to become of her. She and Wolf were too young to marry, and yet there was no woman to care for her if she came to live with him and his father. It was clear that some solution of the problem must be found quickly. Meantime, the events of this day claimed them. By the time Wulfstan with Wolf and Fritha came near the door of St. Martin's Church, a great procession was already on its way across the meadows to the river. It was there that the king's baptism was to take place, so that as many as possible might see it. First came every monk of the community, carrying great banners and swinging censers from which blue clouds of sweet burning incense rose on the summer air. As they went, the monks sang together, chanting psalms according to the rules laid down by Pope Gregory himself. Then came the senior members of the community and the cross borne today by the youngest monk, Brother Simplicissimus. Behind the cross-bearer walked Abbot Augustine, taller than any there. His head was lifted, and the sun shone on his strong face, in which pride and humility seemed to struggle together. Proudly he led the king toward the King of Heaven, and humbly he made the offering of his convert. Behind the abbot, the king walked alone. He wore a simple belted tunic to his knees, and his head was bare. He held his hands lightly clasped before him and frowned as he went, for this was for him a moment of great solemnity. He knew, as Augustine knew, that hordes would follow him, not all from a true intention, but many because he was their king, and what he thought must necessarily seem right to them. And out of the might came great good or evil. After the king came Queen Bertha, her chaplain Bishop Leothard, her ladies, and her eldest son. Behind them again, nobles and leaders of the court. It was a slow business, moving in that ever-increasing crowd to the river. Wolf held Fritha's hand, afraid he might lose her in the crush. In spite of the joyful solemnity of the occasion, he was looking this way and that the whole time, afraid he might suddenly see Hardra's revengeful face or Uthra's keen with malice. Wulfstan was close on their heels, so Fritha was by no means unprotected. Nonetheless, both Wolf and his father were aware that in a crowd such as this one it would be easy to snatch her away and escape. She should never have returned to Canterbury while Hardra lived, but what else could they have done but bring her with them? At last they reached the meadow. The crowd spread out along the river bank, some who wished for a better view and could not take time or trouble to walk back to the ford, slid into the water and swam across. Soon there were as many as one bank as on the other, all gazing toward the king, who had now moved to the ground chosen and kept clear for the ceremony. The river bank sloped away here, and there was a little beach. The monks, still chanting, formed a semicircle, enclosing the spot and making of it a place of prayer and worship. The sunlight, so clear in the brilliant sky, laid a glossy splendor on the scene, though the bulk Of the people there were poor, with rough clothes and dirty faces. On this day they seemed twice themselves. Gradually, the faces of those who had come to grumble took on a fresh expression. Most of them had never seen the king before. Many others had never even seen one of his nobles, and their dress alone, the red of cloaks and tunics, the silver and copper and gold ornaments that glinted in the sun, drew cries and sighs of admiration. Soon round the outskirts of the crowd, among those too far away to take any proper part in the ceremony, beggars began to move with whining cries, imploring food and money. They had come from the crumbling parts of this city and the nearby port, where they lived like rats in a sewer and were barely seen by daylight. They were ragged and filthy, covered with sores, and often short of an arm or a leg or an eye or an ear. "What do they think?" Wolfson muttered. "That this is a fair or a market? Be off," he cried to one who came near, "or else listen and watch and pray that what eyes you have may be opened." It was foolish and fruitless advice, and harsh too, for these were the remnants of humanity whose avarice was the fruit of their bitter poverty. And what could they know of prayer who had never been taught? Now the excitement was mounting. Fritha and Wolf forgot about Hardra and began to move away from Wolfstan, making for the place where the crowd was densest, hoping to take a nearer part in the ceremony. They eased and slid between men and women, craning to see over the heads of their neighbors. In this way they contrived to come where they could not only hear the singing clearly, but where Wolf could also recognize those he knew best among the monks. Then he saw that they had come, without realizing it, close where the queen was kneeling on a little cushion set for her by one of her ladies. She wore a purple cloak and a white veil, and over the veil the golden circlet that was her royal crown. "She looks so pale," Fritha whispered. "Her hands are like lilies. Is it because she is sick, or just because she is a lady?" "How should I know? They say she need do nothing all day but say her prayers and sing to her children. Could that be true? Look, it will happen soon. Watch." Suddenly the singing ended. The crowd gave a whispering murmur and then was silent. The voice of Augustine was heard, then not only by those close at hand, but by hundreds. He raised his hand to bless and make holy the water that would baptize the king, crying as he did so, "Exorciso te creatur aquae in nomine de Patris omnipotis." Fritha's head was bent, and her two hands covered her face. Glancing at her, Wolf remembered that other baptism, when she and her father had knelt before Augustine in the dark church of St. Martin. He saw how that first ceremony had been a preparation for this one, the first link in a chain that now held the king himself, binding him to all those behind and ahead whose faith and purpose were the same as his. The silence of the crowd became a humming silence of anticipation as the abbot held out his hand to the king and they went down together to the water. At once the king dropped on his knees, and the water by the little beach flowed about him. Gently yet steadily, Augustine, his cross bearer at his shoulder, stooped and scooped up the water of the river he had blessed into two hands, and praying poured it over the king's bowed head. Then the abbot knelt, and the singing broke out above them in a tumult of praise. The king bowed his head until his brow was against the waters of the river. Then Augustine rose. He raised up the king and embraced him. As the king stepped back to the bank, Augustine lifted his hand and made a great sweeping sign of the cross, then embraced the whole mighty crowd gathered in the shadows. A sharp whisper ran among the crowd. A few held up their arms to shield their eyes as though not daring to let this blessing come upon them. Others furtively made the sign against evil. Most, however, seeing their king come from this ordeal not only whole, but with a smile of great contentment and joy upon his face, accepted what was offered, even though they could not understand. Later, they would say among themselves, "I saw what he did. I knew why he did it, or I was the better for it." And this God speaks with a good voice, for they knew only that Augustine was the God's priest and imagined that his great voice was the voice of the God speaking through his servant. Gradually, the procession reformed. The singing began again, but now it was like the joyous shouts of angels, huge in triumph, rich in contentment. Whereas in approaching this place they had moved with solemn deliberation, now they seemed to surge forward, as though the singing carried them. The people started running, first ahead of the procession, then after it, then hurrying at its side. The king and the abbot walked together now, water still dripping from their clothes, which were wet to the thigh from the river. The monks surrounded them, but every now and again they were caught up in the tumult of the crowd, where might be a darting figure stretching out a hand to touch the king or Augustine, then falling back quickly, almost shyly, as though overcome by the daring of it. And all the time, the slow talk of the people was like a background to the singing, as they constantly repeated the names of Ethelbert the king and Augustine the abbot, over and on, like a litany or an incantation of their own, across the meadow of the wide pathway leading through the city to the church of St. Martin. There, at a solemn mass of thanksgiving, the king would make his communion. Wolf and Fritha were still standing near the queen. She had remained all the time with her face buried in her hands, and none had felt able to interrupt her prayers. It had been said she had lacked zeal, or the king would have embraced Christianity years ago. But he was a proud man, that could be seen at a glance, and she could not have been so very neglectful, or he would not have offered himself so soon to Augustine. It was only a few months since that day the mission had landed on the Isle of Thanet, utterly uncertain of what might be in store. It was through the Queen that they had been welcomed, and because of her they faced now great opportunities and the firm hope of progress. Looking at the Queen's bowed head, both Wolf and Fritha felt a great warmth in their hearts. Now the Queen was rising, and Bishop Leothard had stepped near to hold out his hand and help her to her feet. They began to move away from the rest, the ladies clustering around. One furtively brushed the grass from her skirt and frowned a little at a green stain. A number of men at arms appeared as from nowhere, and the queen's procession was soon moving away from the meadow and out of sight like all the rest. The meadow was empty of all save Wolf and Fritha and the little cushion the queen had knelt on to save her from the grass. Wolf stooped and picked up the cushion. As he did so, he heard his father shouting from the roadway, "I've been looking for you. I have news." They ran across to him at once, full of their own excitement. "We were close by the queen. How beautiful she is!" "A boy from your home came searching for me, Fritha," Wolf's son said. "There's nothing to fear now from Hardra. For the murder of a Swede he was to die, but Uthra freed him in the night, and they both took their boat and sailed away. But now they are in a new country, or even drowned if they have their deserts." This abrupt return to everyday matters was somehow hard to accept. The events of the morning had transported them into some other world. Now they found that problems remained. If Hardra was gone and the danger with him, what then? "Wolf and I will take you home, Fritha. You have others there who will care for you. This is so, is it not? There's my mother's sister. Then we will go to her." Fritha's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Wolf. He was frowning, almost scowling at his father. "She is not a Christian," he said at last. "Today will mean many, many conversions. Fritha shall be a missionary in her own village." "She should have some Christian women to care for her," Wolf insisted. Wolfstan became exacerbated. "How can this be? It must be, father. Siniag gave Fritha to me as he died, and I say that she must be cared for by a Christian woman." "But we know no Christian women, boy." "We know one," said Wolf, "the queen." He tucked the embroidered cushion under his arm and held out his hand to Fritha. "We must wait by the church door until she comes. She will give us a boon in return for the cushion. This is a day for queens to grant boons. She will listen. Fritha, she will care for you." It was late evening when Wolf made his way to the monastery kitchen and found Brother Adrian clearing up after a hard, long day. "Rejoicing will always lead to feasting," he complained, "and that is hard on all cooks." He looked from under his black eyebrows at Wolf. "Where have you been? You reached home this morning, for I saw your father and heard what he had to tell. Could you not have come to work?" "I saw the king baptized, brother. So did we all, praise God for it. And then I spoke with the queen." "Indeed," said Brother Adrian, "truth is a great virtue." "I am speaking the truth, brother. The little kneeling cushion was left in the meadow, and I took it to her. You are going up in the world. Better carry cushions for queens than meal and maize for Brother Cook." "I will work now, brother," Wolf said, grinning. "My father is with the abbot. There is much to tell him. I will scrub the floor for you." The brick floor of the kitchen was scrubbed every day at the very least, for Brother Adrian was fussy about beetles and mice. He sat himself down on a bench as Wolf fetched a pail of water and flexed his tired feet, which had been chafed by his sandals. He had spent such a long time standing and running from oven to table, he began to ask questions about the journey past while Wolf started scrubbing, and he groaned when he heard of Siniag's death. "God rest his soul as he deserves. He may have brought many into the fold by the manner of his dying. And what of his daughter now?" Wolf did not look up when he answered. "The queen has promised to care for her. She is the lady the mother of God herself has blessed," Brother Adrian decided. "So the girl will be one of her household?" Wolf nodded. He felt himself redden as he scrubbed. Had many things to remember of that day. Of course, he must remember that it was the king's day, but Wolf felt a long way from the king in spite of everything. He was the queen's man, rather. What he remembered most then was the queen's surprised soft smile when he had begged a way to her, then her interest, then the way she had taken both of Fritha's hands and held them and told her to be comforted, for her father's soul was surely safe in heaven. Then the queen had said, looking about her at her ladies and her chaplain and the rest, I am to found a convent, a sisterhood. Who knows? This young maid may be one day be its abbess. It was this in particular that Wolfe, as he scrubbed the floor vigorously, blushed to recall, for he had seen that the queen was speaking not altogether in jest. He had been bound to speak out. No, lady, he had said firmly, as though he were the abbot himself, and able to contradict even a queen. No, lady, for she is my betrothed. Her father clasped our hands together as he died, and we have sworn an oath to be husband and wife one day. In the church of St. Martin on the day of Fritha's baptism, this was the promise we made. The queen had looked at Fritha and asked if this was so, and Fritha had replied yes in a faint but firm voice. This time, as she turned back to Wolfe, the queen was really smiling. Then this is my promise. I shall keep her in safety for you, but it must be for 7 years, she said. As he remembered this, an immense happiness and contentment touched Wolfe. God knew it was a long time to wait, but it was just, and they would endure it. Take care, cried Brother Adrian. It was too late. The bucket was knocked over, and the water was spreading all over the floor. Not that it mattered. It would have needed a deluge to disturb Wolfe just then. An hour later, the kitchen was clean and tidy. As Wolfe threw out the last pail of water, the bell rang for the last office of the day. He left the kitchen, and the monks began making their way to the chapel. The chapel was in the crypt of the building, which increasingly gained dignity as the brothers worked on its restoration. Wolfe flattened himself against the wall to allow them all to pass. Their sandals flapped on the stone floor. There was a swish of long robes. They walked with their hands in their sleeves and their eyes downcast. They went by silently, contained within themselves. The day had been a great day. They were weary as well as exalted. Each man seemed to carry with him a new happiness and a new confidence. They had set out a year ago from their own sun-warmed country and come to this chilly island. They had done it for the love of God, and they had often faltered, but today they had seen the beginning of their reward. The excitements were over. The king returned to his own dwelling. The crowds dispersed. Now they were left, the small community, to their own humble prayers. It was only a beginning. They all knew that. The hard work that lay ahead, the hazard of thrusting on into a country still bound in its majority to paganism, the tussle with forces so long familiar that they were in the very roots of the people. These trials they accepted calmly, for they were the just dues of their calling. At the end of the double file of monks, in the place of a shepherd driving forward a willing flock, Augustine walked with tireless dignity. Unlike the others, he was looking straight ahead of him. There was a faint, unfamiliar smile on his face that proclaimed his contentment with this first great step. The next step was already before him, and the king himself had that day given the sign that it must be taken soon and taken boldly. You have set my feet this day on the steps to heaven, King Ethelbert had said. Now I will set yours on the steps of a throne. The Pope already urges you to seek consecration as a bishop. I have another prayer, and one I know will be granted. We shall speak of you soon, Father Abbot, as the first Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay, so the king is being baptized, and people come from all over. There's a huge crowd, and they all hear Augustine give the gospel. So there are a lot of people who say they want to believe, but they also know that some people are just saying they believe because the king is a Christian now and that they aren't having a true belief. So they know they can't really help that, but they are still trying to have as many people as possible hear the gospel. Um, Wulfstan finds out that Hardra and Uthra have run away because they were going to be killed, or at least Hardra was going to be killed for murdering his wife. And so they have fled, and she's safe now. She doesn't need to worry about them, but she does need a woman to be her mother. So Wolf wants it to be a Christian woman. So he goes to the king and to the queen, and asks her if she will take care of Fritha until they're old enough to get married. And the queen says yes. So he goes back to work with Brother Adrian in the kitchen, and the everybody kind of has resolved all their problems that have been happening. So we'll see how it ends.